One of the really successful things that happened was that we were able to get a ministerial order that expanded who could administer COVID-19 vaccines. I don't know where we would have been if we hadn't been able to bring in veterinarians and optometrists and dental hygienists and the dentists and massage therapists and all of those folks into our vaccine clinics. Because if we would have depended on public health nurses, who is the group that usually does most of our vaccines, first off, there's not that many of them. And they were very busy at that time, dealing with outbreaks and case and contact investigations. And so we already were challenged just bringing them in as leaders to help set up the clinics and do the rollouts, let alone all the administration. So we had a Red River College course that trained people in how to do an intramuscular injection into the deltoid, that went through the specifics of COVID-19 vaccines, because their storage and their sensitivity is different than vaccines we're used to. You can't just keep them in a fridge, you can't shake them. The nanoparticles are very sensitive, so that's why we weren't allowed to drive on the bumpy roads at first. But it was going to RBC when we had all of these people there was one of the most hopeful places I've ever been. You would see all of these people from different areas who had never thought about giving a vaccine in their life, who had just wanted to help. And the people were so happy, the staff were so happy to be there, the people coming to get the vaccine were so happy to be there. It honestly was the place I went when I needed my spirits lifted in the midst of all of the stress of everything. And that was because we were able to expand and bring in new people. So RBC became our first super site. Right at first, we were having hundreds of people coming in a day. Brandon opened not too long after at the Keystone Center as our second super site. But the idea was always we were going to have thousands of people coming through these sites, and that seemed impossible. I remember when the headlines basically were making fun of us for saying that we thought we were going to be able to get 10,000 people through in a day, or 20,000 people through in a day. And eventually we did, but not by January. We also didn't have enough vaccines. That would have been completely pointless to have 20,000 people come through in a day in January, because we did not have enough vaccines that would have been useful. But we had to be thinking about all the things on the side of the screen there. It was a huge team. We had to have legal and finance, because we had contracts with RBC, with Keystone, with all of the locations. We had the public health nurses who were running the show. We had inventory, supply chain, procurement. We had people doing the freezers and all of the equipment, setting up tables, putting tape on the floor, what was the flow through the clinic. We had to have, like mass event specialists, people who have done festivals and other major events, who could help guide us through how you move thousands of people through a site, which meant communications, it meant signage. So a very huge, huge thing to do. And then we started to see that people were having blood clots. It was rare, but when they happened, they were extremely severe. And there were deaths in Europe, and we even had one death in Canada. And so because of that, the recommendations completely swapped, where we were saying, don't give it to young people, only give it to older people. And in the AstraZeneca world, we quickly lost the confidence of the public. People who took the AstraZeneca vaccine felt like they had gotten an inferior product. They felt like they had been duped. And this is one of the areas we can look back on and really think about, we could have communicated better, but we didn't know at the time. And so we really tried to communicate that all of the vaccines are better than not having a vaccine. Don't wait just because one vaccine might be better. Because first off, we didn't even know if one was better than the other. They were never compared head to head. So if you're using a product in a different population, at a different point in the pandemic, in a different part of the globe, you can't say with certainty that it's more or less effective. We really didn't know. So even though the numbers looked different, maybe the group that we gave it to had a different variant of the virus going around when it was studied there. Maybe AstraZeneca is actually better, but just was trialed in a situation that made it look worse. Since then, it seems to probably be not as good, but even that, when we look at some of the longer term data, it might actually be better. So we still don't know because there's no head-to-head comparisons. But it was an unfortunate situation where a lot of people felt that they had been misled and felt they had made the wrong decision by protecting themselves.
This week, we will collectively decide on next steps on both the pandemic agreement and on the IHR amendment and negotiations. Canada remains committed to continuing to work together to prevent and minimize the devastating consequences of future global health emergencies and pandemics, and to further advancing health equity for all. A meaningful pandemic agreement is consensus-based and one that member states can sign, ratify, and implement. Thank you very much.
But you know the serious challenge that's posed by anti-vaxxers, and I think we need to strategize to really push back, because vaccines work, vaccines affect adults, and we have science, evidence on our side. I think it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. I think they use COVID as an opportunity, and all the havoc they're creating. Maybe that's one of the messages also I would like to include to whatever I have said.
If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken. It is better to be preemptive and precautionary and take the heat of people thinking you might be overreactionary, get ahead of the curve, and then think about whether you've overreacted later. But it's such a serious situation that I think decisive early action is the key.
Police checkpoints are set up on all the bridges, and everyone leaving the city is required to show proof of vaccination. Those who refuse to cooperate are taken away to temporary detention centers.